All right, from that uplifting story, we get into a conversation on Kenya, her allies, and co-architects. As I mentioned at the start, I'm joined by Dr. Edgar Githwa, who is a diplomacy and security analyst. Good to have you in studio this evening.
Thank you, Olive.
And we're joined from across the pond in Washington, D.C., Joanna LeBlanc, who is an adjunct professor at Howard University, American Foreign Policy. Good to see you, Joanna, as well.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let me just quickly set the stage for the conversation we're having this evening. And we have the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chair James Risch, who is also the Idaho Senator, who has called for a review through legislation, proposed amendments, for a review of Kenya's major non-NATO ally status. And some of what he wants assessed is a description of, political, financial links of key political actors, institutions with China, Russia, and Iran, an assessment of relationships of the government of Kenya and key officials with the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, Al-Shabaab. This is just highlighted a few, and one of the other areas he wants assessed is that of trade and investment, the trade and investment relationship with China, and assessment of the use of U.S. intelligence support on state and non-state sponsored actions against civilians, to including abductions, renditions, torture, and violence against civilians. Take a listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kenya and China are not merely trade partners. We are co-architects of a new world order, one that is fair, inclusive, and sustainable. No other circumstance other than the post-war situation would have made the current structure of the UN, and more particularly, the UN Security Council, and that is the 5 permanent members with individual powers, an acceptable peace and security architecture. The Security Council, once a beacon of peace and diplomacy, now has 1 permanent member invading one country, while another member takes sides in conflict, in direct contradiction to the Council's own resolutions. Yet today, the permanent members live in denial and resist reform, even as the Security Council becomes less and less legitimate, and its relevance is being put to question.
Many African nations maintain troubling ties with China, including key national security partners. Just last month, President Ruto declared that Kenya, a major non-NATO ally, and China are co-architects of a new world order. I have to tell you that watching President Ruto with the Chinese holding hands and talking about a new world order is just stunning. After all the work and effort we've put in there, and to see him talking about a new world order, you know, the new world order was constructed by the United States and democracies, capitalist countries that are human rights loving countries, and the new world order that these countries are talking about is being constructed by the autocracies, the outright communists, socialists, people who have no respect for human rights. It's stunning to hear countries talk about wanting to join or promote that world order when the world order that was constructed after World War II has served us so really well. Certainly not perfectly, but then again, the world isn't a perfect place, but so much better than what you'd see if the autocrats took over.
All right, I'll start with you, Joanna. How significant is this move by Senator Risch, who we heard from there, this proposed amendments calling for review of Kenya's major non-NATO ally status?
Well, as a former senior staffer on Capitol Hill, I can tell you this is not just a bilateral review. It is a recalibration of trust and expectations in a world that is that is changing. The global world order is certainly taking some hits, and there are some shifts, and also too in under the America First approach. But it is not to say that Kenya does not have any leverage, right? Kenya is a gateway to East Africa. Kenya has been a significant partner to the United States of America. But however, the United States Congress and the administration wants to be certain that Kenya is a friend, not one that will undermine its strategic and national security interest in the region or anywhere else in the world.
All right, I'll come to you now, Dr. Githua. Is Kenya caught in the middle of a trade tiff between the U.S. and China?
Thanks for your question. Not only a trade tiff, but also geopolitical power play. Geopolitics, because the U.S. increasingly sees China, getting more influence on the African continent. And of course, the U.S., being the superpower currently, that it is, feels that China is encroaching on its turf and getting more popular. So Kenya is caught between a rock and a hard place in this geopolitical global power play. And granted, Kenya, as a sovereign country, also has to make its choices. All countries make their own decisions based on their own interests. So I keep saying many times, there are interests that the Americans will help us fulfill and there are interests that the Chinese will help us fulfill. It's that delicate balancing act that we are caught in between, and we need as a country to navigate so that we don't end up, losing one for the other, because we need both for various reasons.
All right.
Yeah.
So, Joanna, is this a lone voice coming out of Washington? How influential is Rich? Could his remarks speak for many more in Washington?
But again, as a former staffer on Capitol Hill, I've worked with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and several other committees on matters impacting the African continent and the rest of the world. Senator Rich is a powerful man. He is the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he is a Republican. He worked in close collaboration with former Senator Marco Rubio, who is now the Secretary of State. And I expect that this amendment will pass in the National Defense Authorization Act, because the bill itself will pass, and the amendment within the bill will certainly pass. However, I think it's important to note that the Trump administration does not need this particular amendment to pass in order to remove Kenya's non-NATO ally status, because as you know, Olive, the status was provided to Kenya under executive order under the Biden administration. So therefore, it was not done through legislation. So you don't need legislation to undo it. So I think that's important to note. But certainly, the amendment will pass in the bill, and it will become law. And Senator Rubio, Secretary Rubio rather, will then send a review of the relationship between the United States and Kenya to Congress for further evaluation.
All right, Dr. Githua, what do you make of Kenya's response? We saw President William Ruto speak on Kenya's trade relation with China at a round table with KEPSA. We saw him speaking at the Peking University in April during a state visit to China. And one of the points he made then was, Kenya generally takes a non-aligned position. It tends to try and be neutral.
Yeah. So his response is what in international relations we call realpolitik. Realpolitik means he made a statement bringing about Kenya's sovereignty. He stated Kenya's sovereignty is not going to be challenged by and threatened by, other powers. So he had to take that stand because ultimately, regardless of what China or the US gives us, Kenya always has to have a position. All nation states are sovereign, they must have a position. So we call it realpolitik because it was a hard decision, it was a tough bullet, to bite. And definitely the response did not, of course, the response actually that made the Americans angry was the co-architects of the New World Order. For the longest time, that word, New World Order in international relations, has been associated with negativity, a lot of negative things. That's why in the clip you just played, Senator Risch is talking about the world order has served us. Why do we want to rock the boat? So he's feeling challenged. Remember the US being the global superpower and seeing its territory and turf being encroached on by China is very worried when it sees strategic nations like Kenya appearing to side with China. So it is that power play. Kenya is caught in between the power play between the US and China. And I think President Ruto's position in saying that we will not abandon China, he was talking from a realpolitik perspective, saying Kenya will pursue its interest, whoever can give its interest. I keep saying there are things the Americans will do for Kenya that the Chinese cannot do for us, and vice versa. There are things the Chinese will do for Kenya the Americans will not do. So I think nation states should be allowed to make their own decisions, but granted, as an international relations expert, all choices have consequences. Yeah, there'll be consequences for whichever choice we take. So we are damned if we do, we are damned if we don't. Yeah, so the president just took a stand, and Kenya just said, we will align with whoever is meeting with our interest. I think that's what any nation state should do in this situation.
Joanna, given your experience, how would you advise Kenya to navigate the current waters?
But first and foremost, I think that many countries around the world, especially on the African continent, tend to be reactive, not proactive. The reality is that if you was watching what's happening on Capitol Hill, and if you understand the America First policy, which many governments don't quite understand, and don't quite understand to the extent that this administration will go to ensure that the America First agenda is fully executed. And also, I think it's important to note that Kenya is not the only relationship that is being reassessed through Congress. South Africa is also in the same position, and several other countries around the world that the United States has deemed to take certain policy positions that may undermine the U.S.'s national security and trade interest around the world. But again, I think that countries tend to be reactive versus proactive. I think that it would have been very useful for Kenya to have engaged with a lobbying firm in Washington that has its ears on the ground. I understand there's an embassy here in Washington, and the ambassador is very dynamic. He's very engaging with Washington. I've spoken with him a number of times, but the reality is that there are those of us who are considered to be Washington insiders. We will gain information that may not be accessible to the embassy or the office of the president. So engaging with a group that actually has the interest of the African continent in mind, and the respective country in mind is imperative. And I'll tell you this before I close, Olive. When I was a staffer on Capitol Hill, I would be approached by lobbying firms, and they will bash the countries to me as a staffer and talk about all the negative things about the country and say, well, could you please take this meeting with this head of state, or take a meeting with this person or that person. So you really have to have firms and individuals working on behalf of your country who are committed to helping strengthen bilateral and trade relations between the United States and your respective country.
All right, Dr. Githo, it's not the first time that this conversation around looking east or looking west has come up. What lessons do you think there have been for Kenya?
So the lessons are, number one, before any diplomatic or any foreign policy pronouncements are made, to really like what our professor is saying, try and do a little bit of background check on how exactly should I make this statement and what possible repercussions could come out if I mention this or that. That needs to be done. I think Kenya needs to improve a bit on that. But largely, we will never escape this discussion. We'll always, next it will be because we have a friend in a different part of the world who has a quarrel with somebody else. We'll always be caught in this. The key thing for a nation state is to understand that you do not lose your allies as you're making new friends. But at the same time, you try and it's in the language, it's in the tone of how you say it. So in this case, I agree that, for example, when the president went to China, one of the things should have been, we have gone for this kind of engagement. What are the minefields I need to avoid? I think the foreign affairs team needed to have briefed him and told him, avoid these kinds of minefields, given this global tariff war between the US and China. So we will not avoid this. The key thing is for us to be able to, in terms of repairing now this, whatever damage appears to have been made, Kenya needs to quickly, through back-channel diplomacy, reach out to the US and tell them, reassure them, we are still your strategic partners, this is what is going on, and just lay clear what our engagement with China and other countries are, so that we do not get caught in between perceptions and misperceptions, in foreign policy orientation. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Joanna, have the last word for us. Whatever the outcome of this review, how far can the U.S. take things, given Kenya is a strategic partner? You talked about the security situation in Somalia and also in Haiti.
Well, after the assessment is done, Kenya could potentially lose its non-NATO ally status, right? But I think, as the doctor mentioned during his analysis, I think it's important to be clear with the United States, this administration, as to what is Kenya's policy position towards China, towards towards Russia, which are America's adversaries. Under the America First doctrine, the United States wants to see results. The United States wants to see alignment. This is not politics as usual, where because the United States and American companies have significant economic interest in a respective country, the U.S. Would look another way, would not focus on certain issues. Well, under the America First agenda, it doesn't matter how many companies are economically benefiting from relationship with Kenya. From the perspective of the United States, there are a number of other countries where these companies can move to, and the U.S. will provide them with economic incentives to do so if the United States feels that Kenya is undermining its national security and strategic interest in the region. So I think it's very important for Kenya to really study the America First strategy, the America First approach, because I don't think countries truly understand to the extent that this administration will go to ensure that its interests prevail and are protected globally.
All right, thank you for speaking to us this evening. Joanna LeBlanc, who is an adjunct professor, American Foreign Policy, Howard University. I've also been joined by Dr. Edgar Giver here in studio. Thank you for sharing your insights. The conversation continues. We take a break, but coming up on the other side,